morning, everybody. My name is Maurice Button. I'm the CEO of City and Financial Global, and it's my great pleasure to be interviewing this morning Alec Peachey. He's the Editorial Director of Energy Plus Transport, a very prominent and extremely useful online resource on the key issues, particularly including EV. And Alec is going to be moderating a session at our upcoming EV Infrastructure Summit on the 7th of June. Which is being held at KPMG Canary Wharf. So, Alec, good morning.
Good morning, Maurice. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Let's turn to the questions, Alec. So, first question, do you think that the government's recently updated net zero and green finance strategies are useful from the point of view of catalysing investment into EV infrastructure?
Yeah, I think anything that can, kind of put a more laser focus on investment in clean energy and transport, should be welcomed. I think the government has recently set out its stall quite clearly, particularly with the implementation of the ZEV mandate as well. So again, those targets and strategies, if you like, and guidance should really be welcomed by the sector, because it does provide the focus and, I suppose, an assurity that the investment is there, and therefore that gives confidence to the private sector, who are obviously going to drive and push forward a lot of the charging infrastructure that's being rolled out and that is needed.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. At the summit, you're going to be moderating a panel looking at the central government, local government relationship in relation to the delivery of EV. Do you think that central and local government could work more efficiently in terms of delivering this type of infrastructure?
I think there's always a case to be made that they could, of course, work more closely. But I also think that there's a lot being done to make that happen with the introduction of the Levi Fund, the local electric vehicle infrastructure investment fund, which is obviously a £450 million pot of cash for the local authorities to be able to bid in for, to be able to roll out the charging infrastructure more quickly. And I think importantly, from that, specifically 50 million is being made available to upskill officers and provide specific electric vehicle officers within councils, which is much needed, because there is perhaps a lack of skills and training and knowledge within some authorities. And of course, it's important that councils learn from one another too, and central government, I think, have to work closely with local councils to make sure that that's happening. And I know that OZEV, the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, obviously have a lot of dedicated civil servants, again, that are working closely with the local authorities to make sure that happens. So I think that, yeah, there's obviously work being done, but of course more can always be done. And of course, it's important that the charging infrastructure is rolled out in a socially equitable way, because otherwise you could have a disparity in the charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on that point about making sure that delivery happens in an equitable fashion. But when you look at, there's a very uneven distribution of EV chargers across the country. What do you think could be done to improve that? It's based around cities and motorways predominantly. What could be done to improve that situation? What sort of incentives are required, or policies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you're right. I think that, again, going back to my point about being done in a socially equitable way, there are obviously parts of the country, for example, the southeast and London, where, the rollout of charging infrastructure is happening more quickly, which I think you'd probably expect, because obviously it's a more populated area. But this is about trying to do it to make sure that you have, rural and urban areas that are also being provided with the right amount of charging points. But also importantly, and I think we're hearing this more come through in the industry, is that it's the right chargers in the right places at the right time. The government have put a figure of 300,000 chargers by 2030. Which is fine, because again, it's probably a target that's being set that is providing that kind of focus, which I mentioned earlier, which is important. But equal, or if not greater, is the importance that this infrastructure is, as I say, rolled out at the right place and at the right time. And the right type of charging, of course, because obviously you mentioned motorways where you'd expect, the rapid chargers, but in some other areas, you'd expect more of the destination charging. So it's about, I suppose, those habits changing as people adopt electric vehicles and understand the ways in which to charge them. So yeah, it's still a lot of education is needed, but I think that eventually, we're going to get there. We're seeing it happen. So.
Yeah, well, let's hope. I mean, I agree. I think that there's a lot of progress. But recently, obviously, with Biden's IRA Inflation Reduction Act and the expected response from the EU, i.e. large subsidies for all types of renewables infrastructure, do you think that that's going to drain away interest in investing in EV infrastructure in the UK? Will it have an impact?
It might, yeah. I think at the moment as well, one of the biggest issues that's facing the UK is obviously the lack of investment in battery production and gigaplants. Obviously, we've seen the demise of British Volt. There's a lot of talk at the moment, obviously, with government and JLR, perhaps there being an investment there, although I don't think it's a certainty yet, despite some reports. But we will see on that. I think it's important that we do see these gigafactories being built in the UK, because otherwise there is certainly a risk, and we've already started to see it, that some of these car manufacturers, will go elsewhere. And that's not an opportunity that we should be missing in this country. The government have to realise that this is a massive opportunity for the economy. And of course, it's essentially the next industrial revolution, this move to clean energy and transport. So, I think that, there are risks, but hopefully they're going to be mitigated, and we'll see some announcements around that in the not too distant future.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. I think it's such an internationally competitive environment for attracting investment there. So let's hope the government comes up with the right policies. Finally, Anna, because we're beginning to run out of time, looking forward to, say, 2030, what do you think EV charging infrastructure in the UK will look like? How complete will it be, or will it still be a sort of work in progress?
I think based on the pace and scale of what we're seeing at the moment, with daily announcements around charging infrastructure being rolled out, I think that we'll be in a pretty good position. But again, some of it depends on, the right chargers in the right place at the right time. And I think that as long as we kind of get that side of the market correct over the next few years, and educate consumers and businesses around the ways in which we can charge our vehicles, then I think that we'll be in pretty good shape by 2030. I'm sure we won't be completely there, because you're still going to have that mix, obviously, of ICE vehicles on the roads too. So it will just become, I suppose, part of everyday life. It's like any new technologies. People maybe the naysayers dismiss them initially, but then it becomes part of everyday life, and people kind of look back and wonder what all the fuss was about. But I think over the next few years, importantly, this is now about moving further and faster, and we've seen that in the industry. We've seen that with Chris Skidmore's recent net zero review, where he set out recommendations to government for them to move further and faster. It's a focus for us at Transport and Energy, and our annual event that we run as well. So it is important that the industry does move more quickly, but as I say, they do it appropriately to scale, and then in 2030 I think we'll be in a good position.
Good. Well, I think that's an optimistic note on which to leave our interview today. And thank you very much for sharing those insights. Obviously, there'll be further discussion about all those points at the EV Infrastructure Summit, 7th of June, KPMG building in Canary Wharf. I very much hope all our viewers today will be able to join us in person on the 7th of June. Alec, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Maurice. Thanks for your time.